3 trucking scary stories. Story 1. It was a dark and stormy night in the middle of nowhere, and I was driving my 18-wheeler through the winding mountain roads. I had been on the road for hours, and I was starting to feel the fatigue setting in. I had been driving non-stop for the past few days, and I was desperate for a break. As I navigated through the twists and turns, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, but there was never anyone there. It was just my imagination, I told myself. But then, out of nowhere, I saw a pair of headlights behind me. They were getting closer and closer, and I could feel my heart racing. I tried to speed up, but the heavy load I was carrying made it difficult to gain any ground. I was starting to panic when I saw the headlights veer off to the side of the road. I let out a sigh of relief, but then I saw the headlights turn off and a figure appear in the road in front of me. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The figure was engulfed in a cloud of dust as I plowed through it. I jumped out of my truck and ran to the figure, expecting to find a mangled body. But to my surprise, there was no one there. I looked around frantically, but there was no sign of anyone. I must have hit a ghost, I thought to myself. But then I noticed something strange on the ground. It was a piece of paper with a message written on it. "You're next," it read. I didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of sick joke, or was someone trying to scare me? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to try and make it to the next truck stop and get some help. But as I got back into my truck, I noticed that the engine was dead. I tried to start it up again, but it was no use. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help. I was starting to lose hope when I heard a knock on the window. I turned around to see a figure standing outside the door. It was a man, with a twisted smile on his face. He looked like he had been out in the rain for days, and his clothes were soaking wet. "Need some help?" he asked, in a voice that sent chills down my spine. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to take my chances and try to run, but the other part of me knew that I was no match for this man. I reluctantly agreed to let him help me, hoping that he wasn't some kind of serial killer. He disappeared back into the night. I waited anxiously, my mind racing with all kinds of scenarios. What if he never came back? What if he had plans to kill me? But to my surprise, he returned a few minutes later with a tow truck. He helped me get my truck loaded onto the back of the tow truck, and then he climbed into the driver's seat. As we drove to the nearest mechanic, I couldn't help but wonder why he had stopped to help me. But I was so shaken by the earlier encounters that I could not muster the courage to ask him. When we reached there, he simply nodded his head and said in same eerie voice, "Not today." I was relieved that he was not going to do anything to me, but at the same time I was still afraid of him. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about this man. I decided to just get out of there as soon as possible. I just hoped that I would never see him again. To this day, I cannot comprehend what happened in that night. Story 2. It was a cold, dark night in the middle of nowhere. The only light came from the headlights of my semi-truck as I navigated through the deserted highway. I had been driving for hours, making my way from one side of the country to the other. I was tired, but I had a job to do and I couldn't afford to stop. As I drove, my mind began to wander. I thought about my family, my wife and kids who were waiting for me at home. I couldn't wait to see them again and finally get some rest. But as I daydreamed, I suddenly realized that I was no longer alone on the road. There was another vehicle behind me, a black pickup truck that had appeared out of nowhere. It was driving too close for comfort and seemed to be following me. I tried to ignore it and focus on the road ahead, but the pickup truck continued to stay close behind me. I could feel my heart rate start to increase and my palms begin to sweat. I was starting to get scared. I tried to shake off the fear and tell myself it was just a coincidence, but the pickup truck continued to follow me mile after mile. It was like it was intentionally trying to intimidate me. I started to look for a place to pull over and call for help, but there was nowhere to go. The highway was completely deserted and there was no sign of a rest stop or any other place to take shelter. As the minutes ticked by, the pickup truck continued to follow me. I could feel my fear and panic growing. I was starting to think that I was being targeted by some sort of criminal element. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over to the side of the road and stopped my truck. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, hoping that the authorities would be able to help me. As I waited for the operator to answer, I watched as the pickup truck slowed down and pulled over behind me. I could see the driver's silhouette in the darkness, but I couldn't make out any details. I was terrified, but I tried to remain calm as I explained my situation to the operator. She told me that a patrol car was on its way and to stay put until it arrived. I stayed in my truck, trying to keep my eyes on the pickup truck as it sat idle behind me. I was shaking with fear, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a patrol car approaching in the distance. I breathed a sigh of relief and waited for the officers to arrive. When they finally arrived, I explained to them what had happened. They questioned the driver of the pickup truck, who turned out to be a lost tourist who was simply following me because he thought I knew the way. I was relieved that it was just a misunderstanding, but it was a scary encounter that I will never forget. It reminded me of the dangers of being a trucker on the open road, and the importance of staying alert and aware of my surroundings at all times. Story 3. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that made you want to curl up in bed with a good book and a cup of tea. But I was a trucker and I had a job to do. I had been on the road for days, and I was starting to feel the effects of the long hours and the monotony of the open road. As I navigated my way through the winding mountain roads, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was howling through the trees. I could barely see a few feet in front of me, and I was starting to worry about losing my way. Just as I was starting to panic, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small truck stop, nestled in the foothills of the mountains. I pulled off the road and pulled up to the fueling station, hoping to find some shelter from the storm. I climbed out of my truck and made my way inside, grateful for the warmth and light. The truck stop was empty, except for the cashier and a lone trucker sitting at the counter. I walked over to the counter and ordered a cup of coffee, hoping to warm up and gather my thoughts. As I sat there sipping my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The other trucker seemed to be staring at me intently, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as the night wore on, the sense of unease only grew. The other trucker seemed to be getting more and more agitated, muttering to himself and pacing around the truck stop. I couldn't help but feel like I was in danger. Just as I was about to leave, the other trucker grabbed me by the arm and whispered something in my ear. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but the look in his eyes was pure terror. I pulled away and ran for my truck, my heart pounding in my chest. I climbed inside and locked the doors, hoping to find some safety and security. But as I sat there, shaking and terrified, I realized that I was not alone. There was something in the back of my truck, something dark and sinister. I could feel its presence, and it was getting closer and closer. I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. I was trapped, with no way out. I closed my eyes and prayed for deliverance, hoping that somehow I would make it out alive. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence was gone. I started my truck and made it out of there. As I got away from there, I felt a sigh of relief I have never felt before. And from that day onwards, I have never stopped on small stops.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to stay tuned for more true stories.